Hello, everyone, and welcome to this cyber seminar today, non-academic jobs in hydrology, which is a part of our navigating, in this case, non-academic waters series with AGU H3S. Before I hand things off to our panelists and conveners for today, I wanted to give a brief overview of CUAHSI while folks are still getting settled. My name is Julia Masterman. I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for CUAHSI. CUAHSI is the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Science, Incorporated. We're a nonprofit organization funded in part by the National Science Foundation. Our mission is to advance water science by strengthening interdisciplinary collaboration, providing critical infrastructure through our data services, and promoting education in water science at all levels. We seek to fulfill this mission in two main ways, through our data services and our community services. CUAHSI's data and compute services provide tools and support for the entire data lifecycle, from data discovery all the way through publication and archival. CUAHSI hosts two data repositories for water science data, HydroShare and HIS, which can be found at data.cuahsi.org. The hope is that by providing this support and infrastructure, CUAHSI can help researchers formulate and execute their data management plans, be effective data stewards, and meet the requirements of funding agencies. The other side of our organization are our community services. These include grants, workshops, a summer institute with the National Water Center for graduate students, webinar series like this one, a virtual university, a guest lecture database, and plenty more. Couple things coming up from CUAHSI. We have an open source electronics for water research and real-time water monitoring workshop that is going to be held at Stroud Water Research Center. Registration closes this weekend. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to check it out and maybe come join us at Stroud later this month. Additionally, we have a fellowship grant program that's going to be opening very soon. The Pathfinder Fellowship will be open by early October and will close in late November, and it provides travel funds for graduate students to add a field site to enhance your research, or to travel more broadly to support your graduate research. These have been really impactful awards, and it's really inspiring to see what students do with them. And I encourage you to stay tuned and keep an eye out for this opportunity. Finally, CUAHSI's training workshop proposals will be opening very soon. If there's a specialized topic or method you'd like to share with the water science community, let us know. We may be able to help facilitate a workshop on that topic. We've worked with NCAR for a WRF Hydro workshop in the past. We've hosted the Snow Field School, which is pictured here, and plenty of other workshops. And we're excited to be hosting in-person workshops again for this summer. So if that's something of interest, feel free to reach out and check back on our website soon. But back to today's programming, a few logistical things before we get started here. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the CUAHSI YouTube channel. Secondly, we ask that you use the Q&A functionality to submit questions to our speakers. We really look forward to your engagement in the discussion portion of this event. Finally, we expect that all involved with CUAHSI Cyberseminars uphold the CUAHSI Code of Conduct and promote and maintain a professional, considerate, respectful, and collaborative virtual environment. Thank you to the AGU H3S professional development team once again for inviting these speakers. And thank you again to our panelists for taking the time to join us today from all over the world. With that, I will pass the mic to one of our hosts for today. Abby, take it away.
Thank you, Julia. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Navigating Non-Academic Waters, a Hydrology Jobs Panel. We are here today to gain insight on hydrology jobs outside of the traditional university setting. Although graduate school equips students with many skills that are transferable and in demand outside of academic spaces, much of the career advice that we receive is often geared towards staying in academic positions. My name is Abby McCarthy, and I'm going to be one of the facilitators of the event. Today, we welcome 4 amazing panelists with a range of experiences at various career stages to talk about their journey and provide us insight into just some of the many non-academic pathways available in hydrology. Warm welcome to everyone who logged in today. This event is also presented by the American Geophysical Union Hydrology Student Section Subcommittee, also called H3S, and our goal is to provide skills and information that we can share, as well as a supportive network for students and early career scientists in the hydrology realm. As mentioned, there is a Q&A function in the chat that you can use to ask questions. A quick overview of our schedule today. We have a set discussion, question and answer for 40 minutes with time reserved for Q&A at the end. And not only can you ask questions in the Q&A, you can also use the vote function to upvote questions that you would like to hear the answers to at the end. You are encouraged as participants to ask questions in the chat at any time, which will be addressed at the end. And I will now pass it on to a co-facilitator, Devon.
Hi everybody, my name is Devon. I'm acting as the second moderator, and I'm also a member of H3S. And we're so excited to have our 4 panelists, and we wanted to give them time to introduce themselves, talk about their educational background, their past training, and past positions that have led them to where they are at the moment.
Going? Yeah. All right, my name is Laura Hubbard. I'm a hydrologist at the Upper Midwest Science Center, which is located in Madison, Wisconsin. And I apologize, I'm not feeling that well, so I've got some crud in my throat. But my primary job is I'm the co-lead of the Food Integrated Science team within the Ecosystems mission area. So the USGS as a whole is a little confusing. There's a lot of divisions and mission areas and things. And so the Ecosystems mission area covers a lot of ground. It covers biological threats, environmental health, all of those type of things. So the Food Integrated Science team does strictly research related to the growing and raising of plants and animals. So how I got here, I received my undergrad in geology at the University of Wisconsin, and then a graduate environmental science degree from Indiana University. I started at the USGS actually as a student trainee in hydrology at the Wisconsin Water Science Center as an undergrad when I was getting my undergraduate degree. I stayed on in graduate school, working breaks and, whenever I could work, I would work. And then eventually I transferred to be a hydrologist at the Iowa Water Science Center when I graduated with a master's degree. What is my day-to-day like on the job? I do a really nice mix of fieldwork and writing and office work. I have to say, I really enjoy my job. I do a lot of avian influenza research right now. So I was working in the laboratory to validate a method to recover infectious avian influenza from water, which is really important for the question of transmission between birds and people and human health. So doing a lot of field work now related to that method, and also co-leading this Food Integrated Science team. There's a lot of responsibilities with budgetary work and making sure the whole group is, on track with their publications and all the work that they were proposing they would do in the fiscal year. I think that's it. If there's anything else, Abby, that I missed. No?
Awesome, great answer.
So, hi everyone, my name is Fadji Maina and I am an associate research scientist at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center with the University of Maryland, Baltimore-Gondy. I work in the Hydrological Sciences lab. So I am originally from Niger and I did all my studies actually outside the United States. I did my PhD in France and then My PhD was in hydrology. After my PhD, I did 2 postdocs, one in Italy at the Polytechnic School of Milan. And then I moved after that postdoc to the US. I was in Berkeley at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, a DOE lab. And then I joined NASA 2 years ago, actually a little bit more than 2 years ago. And my background is in hydrological modeling. So right now my job is understanding the impact of climate change and human activities on water resources. For that, we are using mathematical models. And because I work at NASA, also a lot of remote sensing data. So my day-to-day work is basically doing developing models and also applying these models on different regions. I have worked previously in California, where we study like impact of wildfires, drought, extreme precipitation on the water resources there. And right now we are using still hydrological modeling to understand the impact of climate change and human activities like irrigation and pumping on water resources in high mountain Asia. So that should be all for me.
Hi, my name is Mike Forgeng. I'm a hydrogeologist for the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission, also called NUAPIC. It has a terrible acronym, but it's a fantastic organization. So NUAPIC pulls together different water professionals from throughout New York and New England to collaborate on different projects relating to water, wastewater, and just any kind of really environmental issue in the area. Within NUAPIC, my position is based out of the New York State Department of Health in Albany, New York. I guess the way that I got here was I had a Bachelor of Science from Penn State specializing in hydrogeology and a Master of Science at Penn State focusing on hydrogeochemistry. And in my research and my field work and all of that in school, I really focused on contaminant transport and different groundwater quality and community engagement. So my day-to-day activity, about half of my job revolves around building groundwater models for different communities in New York. And the other half of my day is working with stakeholders for various New York communities to develop drinking water source protection plans that they can use to protect their water sources into the future, regardless of whether or not they're using wells or river intakes or reservoirs, really anything like that. And I've also been working on harmful algal bloom monitoring throughout New York. And so when a harmful algal bloom is reported, it's my job to determine if it's a threat to a public water source or not. And then I can escalate that if needed. So I'll pass it off to the next person.
Hello, my name is Vedachalam. I'm a water policy specialist, so a little bit different from rest of the panelists. I actually do not have extensive knowledge of hydrology, did not take many courses in that, but I studied a lot more on urban water policy. I did my undergraduate in engineering and my master's in engineering, in mechanical engineering, and then I did not like where that was going, so I decided to switch and applied for a PhD in environmental science with a master's in environmental economics. That was my sort of interest in understanding economics and policy. Those were at Ohio State. And then as I finished up, I was interested in water policy consulting role, but I did not find that. So I ended up doing a postdoc at Cornell, which was not a traditional postdoc, so more like a policy level postdoc. We worked with state agencies. Actually, we worked with NUAPIC as well. It's Mike's agency through a sort of intermediary. And this was a lot of sort of coordination work that I still continue to do. So a lot of my work is actually a lot of emails. Nobody tells you that. So a lot of the day is spent in responding to emails. But other than that, a lot of my work is one, keeping up to date on policy issues. So any kind of news, Jackson water crisis, what's happening in Flint with lead. So sort of keeping up on that. writing proposals, and then doing projects that work with specific agencies. So it could be a state agency, it could be a city, a municipal government, trying to help them advance their water issues by designing new financing programs, designing, how their sort of lead service line replacement program is going to look like, so things like that, and then, working with them through execution. I work at a consulting firm called ECT, but prior to that, I've done a lot of work in nonprofits, so I can speak a little bit about that as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you for these introductions and answers from each of our panelists. So I will start it off with a general question related to the theme of our event. Anyone can jump in for this first one, which is what drew you to a path in government work or industry? And you could include when you made that decision and what factors drew you to the field where you're currently working. Anyone can jump in when you're ready.
I can say something. I think I alluded to that in the introduction. I was interested in working in policy roles right at the end of grad school, at the end of my PhD. And I didn't find that immediately. So I got into a postdoc and then continued doing that for some time. It was engaging, but my eventual goal was to be closer to, DC, where lots of these policy organizations work in and around the government. So that's how I sort of ended up. I did a small fellowship at the U.S. House of Representatives in a congressional office, which was pretty helpful in sort of strengthening that. So that was my pathway.
I'll go next. I was drawn to the U.S. Geological Survey because they were a non-regulatory science agency, which I thought was really neat. I didn't have to deal with policy. I'm very much science-based. Glad other people do policy, but that just wasn't my path. It was also a really good mix of academia and government, since we were non-regulatory, and actually in the water division itself, we're actually soft funded. So we have to find funding for our salary as well as our science. So that's kind of how it's similar to academia, but I guess maybe a little less pressure than academia for finding funding and things, because you can work on other people's projects and things like that. I also really liked the idea of working on national scale projects. The USGS is in every single state, including Alaska and Hawaii. So you really can do some very neat national scale projects, and that's most of what my work focuses on now, is national scale projects.
I can go next. So for me, when I was doing my PhD, I was at the university, but mainly my PhD was funded by a company, the National Energy Atomic Council of France. I mean, just like, so they have like an institution that is quite different from universities. That's where I did my PhD. So I get to use like doing research in an institution, not a university. Then after my PhD, I went also to a national lab, which is not again university. So that's why I had to use to work in this institution. And another thing, like why I'm now at NASA, because during my postdoc, I was mainly using remote sensing data and satellite data to understand hydrology. So for me, it was natural to go to NASA when they have all this data.
So I guess the main reason I'm really going to academia is because it seems like we make a lot of really good innovations and leaps forward in academia, and we have the information there, but it's very often not really distributed out into the public and implemented on a public scale. And I, like many people in our generation, our general age group, are very concerned about the future in terms of water quality and the environment. And so I wanted to find an organization that is implementing things in the real world regularly. And so NOAPIC is a great kind of hybrid between government and private organizations. It's a very interdisciplinary organization that pulls together scientists and community members from all different walks of life. And it's a very, very efficient tool to discuss these new developments, new information, and get them into the hands of the people, whether it's individual municipalities or different government organizations that maybe aren't communicating very well with one another, not for any bad reasons. It's just a problem in government organizations. There's a lot of compartmentalization of things that probably shouldn't be compartmentalized, and there's not really a lot of open communication, and that's what Nuevik really helped with. And so I was very drawn to that, and that's kind of how I went into that direction.
Nice, thank you. I had another question for Laura and Mike, largely because the work you described seems to branch off a bit in terms of what we would typically consider as within the realm of your educational background. For example, Mike, you talk about developing drinking water protection programs, and Laura, you talk about identifying avian influenza in water. So I was wondering, did your graduate training prepare you for this career and the things you do now? If not, what was missing? And if it did, what were the most applicable skills and tools that you learned or regularly use in your job now?
I can go first. I am constantly learning. I learn something new every day. So my graduate training did, I think, set me up really well in the sense that, you know, you came up with your idea, you executed your idea, and then you wrote up what you did. And I think that whole beginning to end sequence really helps me in my job, because that is my job. I'm coming up with project ideas and I'm executing them, and I'm publishing about them. So I think it really prepared me. But like I said, I'm constantly learning. My undergrad was in geology. I don't do any geology in my current job at all. My graduate was in earth sciences, but it was related to not like nutrient specific flow paths. And I don't do any nutrient work anymore either. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to really figure out if you can do the project from start to finish. But like I said, with these science jobs, I think you just have to constantly be willing to learn on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Just kind of putting yourself into a place with your graduate degree to demonstrate that you are capable of learning and that you have a pretty good base background in water resources. Like when I first came to this job, I had pretty minimal experience with groundwater modeling, a very strong conceptual understanding. And so they taught me how to use the groundwater modeling program, and it's going very well. But I really set myself up for this job in my graduate degree. I was very fortunate to have an advisor that gave me flexibility so I could kind of make it what I wanted it to be. And you brought up the community involvement and building these drinking water source protection plans. Throughout my graduate degree, I made an effort to work with communities as much as possible to organize different sampling events and different educational things. And so I gained a lot of skills communicating with different municipalities and especially like rural communities. And then most of my part in the drinking water source protection plans is the more technical advisor aspect. And so we'll evaluate what they are concerned about in their community. And then I will usually take the initiative with proposing different, whether it's a groundwater model or different GIS kind of work. But I did in my graduate degree put a lot of time to learning how to use ArcGIS and different kinds of coding. So if you haven't done that yet, do that because it's pretty universally useful, especially ArcGIS. If you have the opportunity, definitely learn how to use that. I'm not actually sure if I answered your question fully, but that's sort of like, I really did prepare myself for this job well in my graduate degree. And yeah, it's a good place to sort of get like a rounded knowledge that you can apply to any kind of job once you get out.
I echo Mike's importance of ArcGIS and like learning R programming. That is super important. That's something I had to learn on the job, the R portion of it. And I would have liked to have come in with the knowledge.
Thank you for those answers. I'm going to shift to the next question, which is about international experiences and international work, which I will direct to Sri and Fadji. Are there any considerations for international graduate students who are thinking about careers in the United States, or any comments you'd like to make about your experiences working internationally?
I can go first. So I certainly have the experience. I came here as an international student, did my graduate school. That part is easy. Staying in grad school is easy, but once you graduate, you'll lose some of the benefits that the US sort of immigration system offers. And then you have to find a visa to work. You can get one if you are working in an academic setting. It's a little bit easier, but it's much more challenging once you go out of that system. So if you're doing a PhD and a postdoc, it's probably easy. If you're working in a university as an instructor or a researcher, it's probably easy. But once you go find work at a consulting firm, a nonprofit, or any company, even local agencies, city government or state government, it's going to be a little hard. So that part, and it's gotten harder and harder. So unfortunately, I have lesser sort of words of encouragement here, because I went through the system. I realized it's shockingly hard to get to a point where you can apply for a job just like anybody, and not have to qualify yourself with statements saying you need this, and that. So I can certainly talk to anybody who is on the panel and has questions individually after this, because it's a long conversation, long and hard. So I'll be open to that.
Yeah, I would echo that, because I came to the US as a postdoc, so I can definitely agree with Sri that it's really hard. Like the immigration in the US is something that we should take into account when we think about our career after our PhD or our master. PhD, as he said, it's easy because for postdoc, like for international students, can have like visa like the J1 visa, and later on try to have the H1B and go through the green card process. So it's really something hard. But for me, like having the international experience is really because I still do publication and research and collaborations, just like trying to see what's going on around the world, because at the end of the day, we are publishing in the same journals. So we have basically someone in Europe or the US, we are going to publish in the same journal, or like in Asia. So it's really good to know what's going on around the world, how people work, because even like the difference between Europe and the US for me was like a big change. Like I have to adapt to the US system. I have to learn things like our graduate program is not the same as here. Like we don't have the same years also of PhD in Europe than here. So, but it's really worth it because you get to know what people are doing. So the same research questions can have like answer in the US, and in the Europe, you can try to do something else. And then also you establish kind of like your network around the world. When you go to the international conferences, you already know people from other countries. So and also when you publish your paper, probably people are going to know more about your work because you have an international network.
That's very interesting. Thank you for both of those answers. And I'm glad that we could just start that conversation and start to include that perspective. Thank you, Sri, for also offering to follow up with people who have more questions on that topic. Now we have some questions that are in the Q&A that we can start to address. And the first question, so if you have more questions, drop them in the Q&A. We already have 6. The first question, which any of the panelists can answer, is did you have a region of the country or world that you wanted to work when you were looking for jobs out of grad school? And did that impact the way that you searched for positions or networked?
I would go. Yeah, for me, like when I was in Europe, like also like the international experience, as I mentioned before, like my PhD advisor was like, you have to have an international like experience just to have you to be exposed to the world. But I was looking like I got interested actually in water science because I came from West Africa, Niger, and we have a lot of water scarcity issues. Drought is very frequent in the region, so that's why I wanted to do hydrology. So after that, I was like, I need to study water like in other places around the world. And what got to my mind was California, drought, wildfires, floods. It's something like almost like how we have in Africa. So I was like, I want to go there to study impact of climate change, and why California also because they have like high computational resources. That's what I was doing. So that's what I was looking for. And also then NASA for me is like, I started using remote sensing data a lot. And then I'm like, okay, I need to go there also to study, to use remote sensing data because I was using NASA remote sensing data so it's better to be working for NASA and using their data.
Very interesting. Did anyone else want to add on to that question?
Yeah, I can say, again, as an international student researcher, it's a little bit hard to figure out, there are not too many options. You get what you get. So that's how I ended up with at least my first postdoc at Cornell. And then as that was sort of wrapping up, I wanted to move closer to DC, but I didn't find any, again, similar challenges with, having visa issues and then finding a job. So I applied for another postdoc. I got another postdoc, which was at Johns Hopkins, which was at least that much closer to DC. So I thought, oh, maybe that's a way to get there. So, you go to Baltimore, it's within commuting distance to DC, and you can have meetings and, meet people. So that was one reason. And then I, had my wife who's also looking for a job. And that's a sort of a second problem. Then you have two people in small towns, harder to find a job. So that actually paid off. She found a job soon after we landed in Baltimore in DC. And so that allowed us to sort of, stay here. And then I found a job in DC. So that I'd say my decision was guided by the kind of work I do, which is much more policy centric. So it doesn't have to be DC. A lot of policy work happens but largely in urban sort of centers. So, Chicago for the Midwest, or, other sort of big cities where there might be regional hubs for work related to that area. And a lot of networking is important. So at least in my job, it's a lot of meetings, knowing a lot of people, talking, a lot of talking. So you need to be in a place where you can certainly, Zoom in the last couple of years, Zoom and, video meetings are much more common and acceptable, but it's still nice to have a cup of coffee with someone or go out for a walk and, do some talking.
And I guess regionally, I had to decide if I wanted to work out west where it's very dry and there's really not much groundwater at all, or if I want to work east where we have a ton of groundwater, but a lot of it's extremely polluted. And so they're very different problems. And so I guess if you would choose to go out west, maybe you'd want to focus in grad school more on things like structural geology and like water resource use by people. Whereas out here in the east, you might want to focus more on like contaminant transport and different like water quality issues. Water quality issues are important everywhere, but there are definitely differences in the two regions. Like in the US, they're like hydrogeology out west is very different than hydrogeology in the east. And so, yeah, that's regionally that was a big deciding factor in the east or for that decision.
For me, I guess I would say I was interested in staying in the Midwest just because of that agricultural aspect. I did a lot of work on agricultural projects as an undergrad. I have a lot of memories from that, including one where I was sent out to chip ice from a flume, but little did I know that they had applied manure and then it rained and then it froze. So when I was chipping white ice, I literally had manure water splashing all over me. I stuck with USGS though, still here. But yeah, that was really important to me, is having that connection to the Midwest and the agricultural and livestock rearing aspect.
Thank you. I guess a follow-up question in terms of choosing your job and location too. Do you think pursuing kind of a more non-academic pathway give you the more flexibility to have these options to stay where you wanted? And then also in terms of like graduate education, do you think pursuing this graduate education, or if you have a PhD, helped you get to this position and gave you more flexibility in choosing these jobs and making you more competitive, and how so?
I can go first. With the USGS, it's pretty important to start there as a student, kind of for several reasons. You can be brought on as like a pathway student, which means that they have the intention of hiring you after you graduate. You have that choice and flexibility. So if you really enjoy the job, and it's kind of like, you know, a 2-year interview, perhaps you could say. So that's really important with getting in with the federal government, I think, because it can be difficult after you graduate. If you stick with the USGS as a student or with the federal government, I think you have like 120 days after graduation even to find a job or to get hired on. So that's kind of a nice option too. For me as well, it was the whole networking thing. So I started as a student. I was able, you know, all these USGS folks know each other in other states. And so that allowed me to kind of move around and stay with USGS during graduate school, and then after when I got my permanent position in Iowa City.
I can go next, saying that at the point, like having a PhD definitely for me was like an important thing, because first in the US for immigration as international student, so it's better to have a PhD to be able to move around, and also like it allowed me like to build my network also, and to build my CV to be able to get into those positions. So it depends on what you want to do. And also with the PhD, it's much more, I found like it was much more easier for me to move around, to say that I'm going to work in this region or like go to these institutions.
In my industry or my type of work, it's not important. It's not essential to have a PhD. So you can have a master's degree and pick up a lot of skills on the job. So I'd say a lot of my colleagues have, you know, master's level degrees. So that's possible. That's doable. In my particular case, it probably is not possible. Like I wouldn't have come here without the PhD. Just having that international, you know, sort of baggage is sort of part of the mix. The second thing is that I'm a late bloomer. I came into the water sector like much later. So I started with a PhD basically without having taken courses in hydrology or, you know, water chemistry or anything. So so it was absolutely essential. I gobble up every bit of knowledge I could in my PhD and you know, graduate school. So that then allowed me to, you know, practice on the job and pick up a lot of skills. And as Laura mentioned in the beginning, you don't learn everything in school. There are some sort of elements of it that you learn, which you can apply, but then you pick up a lot of stuff on the job, and then you keep learning. You know, things change. You know, new sectors evolve, new topics become important, and then people suddenly want those skills. So you have a little bit of that knowledge, you apply and learn. So I'd say that's how, you know, be prepared to learn more.
So I would also add, like, yeah, in my position, PhD is required, so to be able to have to be an associate research scientist at NASA, but also like the PhD is just like that to fill the requirements, right? But then like between your PhD thesis and what you are working on, sometimes there is a huge difference, as they said. So you have to learn sometimes everything, but just like the mindset that you have, like your PhD will prepare you to learn everything and to be able to shift from there. So that's what I think PhD or like graduate studies allow you to do, but then you can do something completely different from whatever you have learned during your graduate studies.
I guess in my field, a PhD really isn't necessary. I know very few colleagues with PhDs, but one thing that you do want to get as soon as you can after grad school, you want to begin the process of getting your professional geologist degree, if that's the kind of thing you're in, or your professional engineering. They're not degrees, they're certifications. So if that is something that you are qualified to take, you want to start those exams as soon as possible, because after you do the initial exam, you have to wait like 5 years or something before you can actually get the certification. So a PhD might not be necessary in this area, but those certifications are important. And to clarify, you don't need those certifications before you get this job. It's just once you get into this kind of field, it's good to start working on those.
Thank you for those answers. I know we have a panel that has more PhDs than not, but your comments about how those professional certificates are valuable to you, and how there's also fields where many of your colleagues don't have PhDs that are non-academic hydro jobs, speaks to the variety of the different careers that we have here. We have a few different questions in the chat that are specific to people who are interested in working in the federal government. For example, someone said, an anonymous attendee contributed, "Thank you all the panelists!" exclamation point. This question is probably especially for Laura and Fadji. Are there any opportunities at USGS and NASA for international students? And another person also wanted to know about working in the federal government, sort of the process of getting there and what relationships you had to build with people to start working in the federal government.
So I'm international. I'm not civil servant in the federal government. I'm a NASA contractor, so I'm not American, so US citizen, let's say. So for NASA, you can do either NASA postdoctoral program and NASA NPP for postdocs. So it's open to both US citizens and foreign nationals, but the foreign nationals are going to have like a J1 visa. So you should look at like J1 visa and all the restrictions that will come with a J1 visa. At NASA Goddard that we have a contractor, so you can be like technically an employee of university, like University of Maryland, Baltimore County, University of Maryland College, University of Maryland, and also other company. And then you can work for NASA at international, as foreign national. But then if you want to become like civil servant, you have to have US citizenship, and then you can go to the civil servant. But some people start as contractor. When they have like their citizenship, they can shift to becoming civil servants.
I really can't speak to international students getting jobs with the USGS. That I'm not familiar. I can look into it for someone if they're interested, but I personally don't have knowledge of that. So I would recommend reaching out and I can try to look into that for you. I think the second question was just kind of related to how to get into the USGS or into the federal government. It used to be that you really had to be a student first or have veteran status. So veterans do get preference with the federal government. So when the applicants get rated, the veterans do get preference on those lists, the callback lists. I will say that nowadays, I think that's changing. I think it's easier for people that did not start at the USGS as a student to get a job. So I encourage anybody interested to start looking at usajobs.gov. That is the website where they list all the jobs available, student and otherwise. And I would encourage you, if you are still a student, to try and get in as a student. It just makes life a lot easier if you're interested in the U.S. Geological Survey as a career option. And just like everyone else, I'm happy if you all want to reach out to me after the panel and ask any questions, or if I can facilitate any contacts for you all, I'm happy to do so.
Nice, thank you so much. I wanted to ask a question maybe more geared towards the day-to-day in your jobs. It's a question from the audience in terms of, can this panelist speak to the importance of project management in their careers, and how did your graduate degree prepare you for this?
Yeah, I started to type, but I was like, this is a longer response. The answer is yes, it is very important. And second, it is not provided by a graduate school. So that is in most cases. I'm sure some people still pick up those skills if they have, a sort of good setup of advisors and, cohort students. But that is the skill that is absolutely essential. You need it right from planning a project to, figuring out how to, design it, schedule it, who to talk to, who are the people you should seek help and bring onto your project, time management, staff management, especially as you become a little senior, or even if you're not, but you are leading the project, but somebody else is supposed to contribute pieces of it. Then how do you make sure that you sort of stay on top of that schedule, ask people, and if they don't provide something, how do you nudge them? There are like so many things built into this that it is an absolutely essential skill that nobody teaches you. And that's my experience, that you sort of learn on the job, but that it shouldn't be that way. There should be much more structured training for doing those kinds of things.
I echo Shree's comments on that. I think being an organized person is extremely helpful. If you are organized from the get-go, it's a lot easier to build those skills of project management, I would say. Also, if you can identify a mentor right away when you start a job, someone who's just willing to, guide you through the process and maybe help you or bounce ideas off them. Hey, I'm trying to do this. Like, what would you recommend I do? Those are two things that I think are very important.
And some things can be automated. So there are some tools now, like people are familiar with something like Doodle for like setting up meetings. So you're not individually emailing, 5 people saying, give me your times. So those kinds of things are now, a few of those things are available, like Asana or other softwares that can help you track things. Those are only helpful if, rest of the setup is sort of designed. So, as Laura mentioned, you have a mentor or somebody who tells you this is, at least in the beginning, this is the next step. You should approach them this way. Or if you get back an email or a phone call that's, not in the expected way, how do you then respond? What's the next step? Those kinds of things. But softwares and tools can be, at least complement you.
Yeah, I agree. The time management is critical. You're always working on more projects than you'd think you'd be working on, and you need to be able to block off time. But I also want to echo what you were just saying about using things like Doodle Poll. If you're trying to schedule a meeting with like a handful of people, just use that or a similar program. It saves so much time and frustration. Because now that we have the ability to do all these meetings digitally, gives us a huge advantage to kind of keep these projects together and well managed. But it can be very difficult to schedule meetings with especially very busy people like mayors or directors of different institutes. It's like herding cats. So Doodle Poll helps tremendously with that.
Yeah, I would say that I will highlight the importance of having a mentor, because that's not something that Grad school is going to teach you. So you have to find your own ways. And sometimes like just by talking to people like high senior level, so that you can understand how they are managing it, and then you can apply, and also knowing yourself what you can do, what you cannot do. And then that's something that you will learn with time. It might not be straightforward, but when you're talking to people, you can learn how to do it.
Great. The question sort of transitions us into another question that was asked in the Q&A, which was from someone who wants to know about how your interest has changed over time in working in a position that's more lab focused, field focused, or admin focused in your career.
I haven't changed like focus since my PhD, because I wanted to do modeling. That's something I was passionate about. Just given my background, I love doing mathematics, physics, and then computer science. So that's what I was doing. Probably like field work for me, I know that it's still important to do some field work when you're doing hydrology, at least like trying to see what's happening in your watershed or like the region you are working on. But yeah, that's not probably something I'm interested in. So yeah, for me, it's like I prefer just like for my skill, I feel like I'm better at doing modeling than going to field work. So I have like 0 field works in my work.
I'm a fieldwork person. I always have been. I really enjoy being outside. I was just out this week trudging around in wetlands, knee deep in muck, loving it for some reason. But yeah, I've always been fieldwork based. I'm doing a lot more project management now, and I'm trying to get out of the field because I'm getting a lot of pressure to write papers, and I need to sit down and do that and not be out in the field. So currently working on training folks to get out. But yeah, I've always loved field work. That's always been my focus of what I do.
I'd say one change in my job has been, at least from grad school, like a lot of analysis and some very little, some lab work, but mostly a lot of data analysis. That has changed. I still do analysis, but like actually talking to a lot more people instead of talking to numbers and computers. So that's become an essential part of my job is connecting and knowing a lot of people, and then making connections, and then figuring out if you get some opportunity, who do we talk to, and how do we bring that in. Talking to a reporter, I talk to them all the time. So knowing exactly what to say in 5 minutes or 3 minutes, things like that. So those are some sort of different skill sets that you pick up along the way, and that becomes helpful as you get into more senior management roles, because then you also do a lot of management where you need to know, oh, if you have this project or somebody's trying to find this role, and you're like, oh, I know this person who can help you with that. So knowing those people is very helpful, because then you can connect the dots and move the process along. And absolutely, budgeting and things like that, which you don't absolutely learn in grad school, become very essential, especially if you're managing project budgets and figuring out how much money we have left over, and who can be assigned, things like that, resource allocation.
And my interests have not really shifted all that much, but my work has. So in grad school, I used to do a lot of field work, and now the field work I do is pretty minimal, and I focus a lot more on modeling and GIS work and different kind of community engagement work. So it, I guess the question, just to make sure I understand, was kind of like, how have your interests and focus changed? I guess I'm not going to have all that much of an answer for that, because I graduated last year, so I'm kind of just diving into this field. But yeah, I've definitely have been focusing a lot more on modeling and GIS work.
I'll just add one more thing to that. So my field work hasn't changed, but my interest and focus have definitely changed over time. I started out doing a lot of like nutrient retention and wetlands and restored oxbows and things like that. And I started doing a lot more with emerging contaminants. Started out with pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, things like that. Now shifting more to PFAS and avian influenza. So things change with time. What's important, what gets funding through the federal government also affects kind of where you want to go with some of your research when you're at the USGS. I know someone asked about, it's important to already know how to PFAS sample if you want to get a job. The answer is no. I think you can pick some of that stuff up on the job very easily. I think the more important thing is to be very conscious of what you're doing, very focused. You can easily contaminate a PFAS sample. So you just have to be one of those people that's very careful and intentional with their actions.
Great answers, and I love how we had all different variety of interests here, from Laura in the field, Fadji doing modeling and other work. This event flew by, and our final question for each of the 4 of you is, tell us one thing that you are looking forward to in your career.
I can go. The USGS has a program called Research Grade, and it's, I guess, similar to being tenured in academia. You put together this very lengthy package explaining, how important your research is, things like that, your publication list. And I applied for that and hoping I get in. Looking forward to that in my career, and also doing more mentoring. I really I enjoy teaching people, and I get excited when younger people join and get excited about the same type of research. So also looking forward to continuing that.
I can go next. So for me, I started when I was doing my PhD, I started working on water resources in France, then I did in Italy, then I moved to the US, I did California, Colorado, I did the Sahel, West Africa, now working on high mountain Asia. So one thing I'm really looking for is like, I have like an atlas of water resources around the world, so I really, like in the future, I would like to see like me studying other regions around the world to be able to compare and to see how water works around the world. So.
I guess the main thing I'd be looking forward to is like in source water protection wise anyway, there are so many different water systems that need to be checked, and there are a lot of water systems that really need new infrastructure, and these source water protection plans that we're working on are extremely important, but they go slow, especially when there's thousands of water systems in New York alone, and then you have to extrapolate that out nationally. Some states don't really work on it the way they should. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how these source water protection techniques can be extrapolated outwards and be done much more efficiently and effectively with stakeholder groups.
One thing I'm looking forward to in the sort of immediate future is growing my team. So I just recently started at this consulting firm. Prior to that, I was at a nonprofit where I was the co-director of a program. I had several staff. So that was it's an exciting sort of role where you can seemingly do a lot of things that you were doing, but it's basically your team doing, and you get it's a lot of work, but I think you get happiness just seeing that kind of expansive role. So I'm hoping to replicate that. So hiring my first hire in the next year or so would be like the first step that I'm looking forward to.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's time to start wrapping up the event. And I love that we're ending on kind of a theme of expansion, whether it's expanding our research throughout the world, expanding our water infrastructure and improving it, or even expanding our teams. I really want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time out of their day to speak with us and share their experience and knowledge. I know I'll really be taking the advice of looking at ArcGIS and R, because that's not the first time I've been suggested this month, and also finding a mentor in terms of any future role we take. I think that's really important. We also want to thank the audience for coming and supporting both H3S and CUAHSI, and we hope you were able to benefit from the reflections and insights during this event. We also want to plug our next H3S event, which is a grant writing webinar on applying for postdoctoral fellowships with U.S. science agencies, where we'll talk to program managers from the NASA postdoc program, NOAA postdoc program, and USGS Mendenhall Fellowship program. I think the link to register for that is in the chat. And for more H3S events, you can follow the organization on social media, and also sign up for our newsletter. Again, thank you to everyone for joining, and we hope to see you all again at a future H3S event soon.